Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Sit Down. I'm Reverend Phil Dieke, the Associate Pastor here at White Rock United Methodist Church. Thank you for being with us this morning for the Sit Down. We're starting a little bit early. This is a little bit of a special edition for our Sit Down. We do this every Sunday morning. Typically, we start around 10:25. We're starting a little earlier this morning. In full transparency, we actually have two episodes recorded with the Bishop of the North Texas Conference, and that was going to air. The first one was going to air today. And we pre-recorded those just because the bishop's schedule is a little crazy, and with COVID and being in person, it was a little bit hard. So we pre-recorded those, and then the events happened on Wednesday. And so we decided that we needed to turn page a little bit and transition. And instead of having that pre-recorded one, now we're here gathered together with the bishop. He's decided to come back and be with us once again, as well as Mitchell is here with me, and Reverend Joshua Manning from Warren United Methodist is with us as well. And so, gentlemen, thank you for being here with me this morning. So what I wanted to start off with was first just wanted to check in and see how everyone's doing following the events of Wednesday that had took place in Washington, D.C., and I wanted to know what you're hearing, what are your constituents saying, how are you responding as faith leaders in your communities? But I also just want to know how you're doing, because I think that how you're doing probably resonates with a lot of the emotions that are being felt by our congregants who are watching right now as well. So, Mitchell, why don't we start with you, just because you're most familiar, and then we'll go kind of around.
Well, I mean, my folks know how I'm feeling because on Thursday they got a letter that was fairly unfiltered, and I kind of said what I needed to say to our congregation. And I think what we saw on Wednesday, personally, we were planning with worship for a lot of the spring and trying to figure out things when I go on paternity leave. And so, Eli's in the other room saying, "Hey, this is a big deal." And we're like, yeah, it's a big deal. But then when I got free of planning and sat down in front of the TV, I was blown away and disappointed, obviously shocked, embarrassed, especially as we've kind of seen what other world leaders have said about the event. It's fairly embarrassing. But then like that evening, Eli looked at me and was like, "What are we going to tell Cash?" And I was like, "I don't know. Do we even start addressing this with the 3-year-old?" But, we didn't turn ourselves away from the television when he came home. And so he asked what was going on the TV. And so I think I just got really, really sad for my sons and the kind of world that they are growing up in right now. It was really a disappointing, dark day for me, I think, as an American.
Yeah, for sure. Joshua, what about you?
Yes. This has been quite the week. The events on Wednesday, I think, for many of us who have been paying attention, it didn't come as a surprise. And I think the disappointing part was that the people and entities that had the power to to respond well, right, or to give a sort of preventative response did not do that, right? Because the threat of danger either was not real, or there was something that they were holding in common with this group of people that they could not act on because of their posts, right? And so I think, for me, there was a lot there. Mitchell, very similar sentiments. I have a 3-year-old daughter. She'll be 4 in April, and I have a 1-year-old son. And so we did not turn the television on because we were just like, well, we're just going to keep this on social media. But, as far as the people at our church are concerned here at Warren, a lot of the conversations have been the same. We're just like, and y'all forgive me, I'm going to be a little crass for a moment. It's like white folks. And that's how it felt. They were just like, yeah, like we're not surprised. I mean, and honestly, if any of us have read history books, generally speaking, historically, those who were colonizing showed up on other people's land and got upset at them for not being able to communicate in their language, right, and hold their customs, right? And so I'm not surprised, and I don't think anybody's really surprised from our communities. There have been a lot of memes, and so like I have kind of I've been laughing at a lot of those. I think that's kind of like the best thing I've been doing here lately. Some of it's comical. It's definitely very serious. But the reason I think a lot of people are finding humor in some of these things is largely rooted in the fact that if we really deal with the fact, like people who were not surprised, people of color, or whatever else have you, who may have elicited a different response from law enforcement or whatever else have you. If we really, really allowed ourselves to become emotionally tethered to the sort of disappointment that was experienced there, I think we'd be in a lot of trouble. So like this sort of like humor that we're seeing around it is really a way of caring for ourselves.
Joshua, real quick. I saw on Facebook you posted something, the black officer that was being, I think we've all seen the footage now, it's been shown everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, that was like running in retreat, trying to hold his space and then having to move back. Like,
yeah, by himself, right?
I cannot see that. I cannot see that. So that's a bigger, you know, let me say it's an issue for me. And I don't want to say too much here because I think we'll have some time for this later on. And it's part of my sermon for Sunday, but it is just one of those things where a person of color has achieved a certain level of influence, right? But then is reminded that they don't really belong when the cards fall, right? And honestly, this is an experience that many people have across industries, right? People of color who live in certain communities, right? No matter what socioeconomic class they belong to, no matter what schools their children go to, because they're, you know, we saw here recently, you know, for the past couple of years, different incidents of where, like here in Dallas, there are kids, so black kids from one private school playing kids from another private school in the athletic competition and being called out of their name on the field, right? Like that has happened here in our city. And so I think for us, you know, it's just one of those things. It's a very quick reminder for all of us, you know, assimilation is not the same as being accepted. So yeah. That's a way to kind of summarize that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joshua. Okay, Bishop, so you oversee 300 and something churches, right, in the North Texas Conference, some predominantly people of color, some pretty much all white, some Latino. You have the whole swath. What are you hearing from people in the conference and from the leadership?
So I must tell you that I don't immediately respond every time. It's simply because I want to get a really good picture of what's happening. I mean, it was pretty clear what's happening, but I learned something new every day. And so I'll be issuing a letter next week. So I don't get any response or hear anything until I say something. And then there's either a reaction or a thank you. And it's one of those two things. But what I will say is that this is a challenge for the church because the church has, in many ways, has lost its moorings. I'm going to share with you why. Somehow that when people actually think that when we speak out about that which is happening in our culture or society, then that's political. But I think I want everybody to understand many of us do that out of our deep faith in Jesus the Christ, who we see is the Lord of all creation. And so when somebody's hurt, I don't think it may be a political statement the way we respond, but that's not a political thing. That is an ethical, moral, faithful response. And so I think we need to get to the place because frankly, we've lost our voice to speak to the society because it's been taken over by another group of Christians who probably applaud this. Look at who was carrying what the other day. So there's several people carrying crosses. There's a couple of people holding a Bible. There's a Jesus flag. I don't claim to speak for God, but I think I've got enough understanding of the nature of God that God was not honored by that in any shape, form, or fashion the other day. I don't care what they were carrying. It does not affirm what they did. I'm not surprised about what happened. I've said all along, this was going to happen. And so we have somebody who and so I just needs to call him out. I mean, I don't understand why Christian have just coddled this guy. It's and by the way, I do mean the president, and I think it's a challenge for us that we finally got to say this is wrong. I mean, we said it was wrong when there was segregation and people were getting beaten. We ought to be saying it when there's blatant racism. And the other day, I mean, let's be honest, if those had been African Americans doing the protesting and doing there would have been some deaths the other day, or that would have been locked up for a long time.
Yeah. I think, Joshua, you said it's not it's not really surprising, right? For anybody who's been paying attention. And I think that's here I am as a white person, right? I think I heard so many people say like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening in America. And then the response that I saw from so many people of color was like, okay, this may not feel like the America that you know, but like this is the America we experience so often. And so I'm curious, like, if there was anything you did find that was surprising or shocking, because to me, like, yeah, again, as a white person, like, yeah, you don't expect this to happen, and it is, you know, unprecedented is an overused term at this point now and where we are. But I think the thing that was most shocking and surprising to me were the Christian symbols that were so prevalent. And again, maybe that shouldn't be the case. You know, I saw somebody post the other day that the most effective weapon of white supremacy is Christianity. It has been for over 500 years. And like, I hate that people are saying that, and I hate that there's truth behind that. So as a pastor, I think what I'm really trying to struggle with, and my response also is, what do we do with the fact that people are using these symbols, like you said, Bishop, right? Like they had flags flying, you know, Jesus is my Lord and Trump is my president. You know, like they had all these crazy symbols of things that were taking place. So, you know, what is your response then to those who maybe are either in your congregation or not in your congregation because they look at this and say, this is Christianity, why would I ever want to be a part of it?
Go ahead.
No, but Bishop, I was just going to say, like, the thing I found shocking, Phil, had a lot to do with the fact, it was one thing for, you know, the cross and flags and all that stuff to be out there, but then there was a hangman's noose out its way. Yes. And so anybody that says that has nothing to do with racism, I think that is truly, that is a choice, right? They're choosing to not accept the facts. There is no reason to bring a hangman's noose to a protest, right? None at all, whatsoever, unless you intend to incite violence and to invoke fear, right? And so I think that is a larger issue for me, because what happened is, like, I personally subscribe to some level of pacifism. My struggle is that I saw and heard a lot of people from particularly the African American community, when they saw that image, then they started making posts and they started making tweets and on Instagram showing pictures of their own arsenals, right? Because now they feel like they have to defend themselves. If a group of people who are clearly motivated by hate rather, are allowed to storm the Capitol without any fear of being killed or detained by the police, if they're allowed to sit in
any repercussions, right? Like that's why they're taking pictures of themselves.
No, but here's the thing, like I wish I could just say repercussions, but the reality is, Phil, like I the first question I had when I saw it in a group chat was like, did they start shooting yet? Right? Because I know that if I did that with a couple other people that looked like me, there wouldn't have been questions. Right? Shoot first, ask later. And so I think this is the problem. Like, I'm not even concerned about repercussions. I know a lot of life would have been lost, and I think there's something to be said for that. And so, like, I'm having a hard time helping people process right here in the faithful perspective. What you asked is like, I'm having a hard time helping people process the fact that we should live into the model Jesus set around nonviolence to the point of turning the other cheek, when there are people who are motivated by their faith, right, the way they understand their faith, to violently reject, you know, whatever the Electoral College is doing, you know, to reject the rights of people of color, right? Like, and not just people of color, but I mean, honestly, I saw a Camp Auschwitz shirt on somebody.
Yeah, I did too.
Apparently the back of it said staff, like just ridiculous.
Crazy. Yeah, so I don't know what to do. Faith-wise, it's hard because I've also had these conversations, and Bishop, I've had these conversations a little bit. Like here in South Dallas, you know, a lot of people were like, okay, well, how do you evangelize? And the problem is, I am trying to talk with people about the ways in which Christianity helped to fuel colonialism, helped to fuel antebellum slave trade, helped to fuel Jim Crow, right? Like, those are the conversations I'm having still. Because there's a generation of people that want to know how they can serve a Jesus who did not, or God who did not actively intervene in the atrocities against their ancestors. So yeah, I don't know. All I have to say, that's what I've been dealing with faith wise.
That's a question later, for the activity and of God and God's agency that we could talk about. But
yeah, we could spend a whole lot of time about that.
Spend a whole lot of time about that. Yeah, and I think and by the way, that it's legitimate. It's like I can understand where that question's coming from. I just don't know how somebody carrying a cross actually thinks they're doing the right thing just because they're carrying a cross. So,
yeah, like that just automatically ordains whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I have never understood the look. I know people, friends of mine who voted for Trump. They're nothing like this, but even then, I wonder how they did it. But I'm not talking about how people voted for, but you finally have to say, okay, this is not right. Now, I wouldn't say enough is enough, because enough was enough a long time ago for me and for many people. But this is a challenge for us, and it's even a challenge for us as a people. And I'm talking about people who live in this country. About, is there a common good that we really consider? I mean, I do think that's a piece of it. I mean, I was watching somebody's Facebook thing, and it's like, why is everybody worried about this? My 403B or 401k has never been this good. And I'm thinking, is that the way we judge health? Really? So there's a kind of self-centeredness sometimes related to what's happening, and certainly some people have benefited significantly. But it's you have to wonder why we can't see through that too. I do worry about, a long time ago, I worried about my children and the world they would grow up in. Now I'm worried about my grandchildren. And I talked to our daughter the other day in California. I said, are they aware of what's going on? Oh, yeah, they're talking back to TV. And I'm thinking, these are two kids who are highly skilled in political maneuvering, evidently. But I sort of wish they were not seeing it. I have to admit.
Yeah, we had the same conversation. Like we felt we just left the news on, and our kids go to Lakewood Elementary here, and they actually announced it on the early morning news. Like when the principal gets on and reads stuff, like she just said, I'm sure you all have heard that there was an attack on the Capitol, and so they came home from school and they were talking about it. Like, hey, they were talking at school today about what we saw on the news yesterday, and so like I'm glad that they're engaging in the conversation. But yeah, I would rather them not see it either. But the reality is this is where we live, right? And sadly, this is just far too often the narrative that we're seeing over and over again. And, it's giving us ample opportunity to figure out how to parent very quickly. So,
well, and I think, like historically, like maybe I agree. I don't want Cash to have to grow up in this environment. I don't want to have that conversation with them. But the truth is, like, if we don't learn to have these conversations with our kids when they're kids, like, we're doing them a disservice by the time that they get to the place of, where they can start making a real impact and real change, and not only in their lives, but in the lives of their communities. And so I think we waffle back and forth, like, what do we do with our children? And I don't know. I guess I just want Cash to know that his parents are engaged in the world, but I just wish that it was a better world that we are engaged with. And, to the symbols that were shown, I think, the Confederate flag inside the United States Capitol. I mean, Richmond was 95 miles away. That's really kind of the closest the Confederacy really got. But for us to believe that somehow the themes and the goals of the Confederacy have died alongside the Confederacy itself at the end of that is a lie. And we there's nothing to be proud about by carrying that flag around. And I think, like, to see that image inside the Capitol on a day when Georgia sent its first black senator to DC, is really, really just heartbreaking for me. And it's really, I don't know what to do with that. I'm still sitting with that.
I think one of the things we got to realize is we don't have to do anything immediately.
Yeah.
that's why I'm sometimes slow. I know some people wish I would speak more earlier than later, and I understand that. And sometimes, and I think Josh, I think you're the one who told me you don't have to speak every time, Bishop. I mean, it's either you or someone else. It's like, so I don't. But this one is just sort of befuddled me in such a way. It's like, how do I get at this? And the longer I get from Wednesday, that's true. By the way, I think Nancy Pelosi made a great statement talking about Epiphany the other day from the speaker's chair after all this. But I think I can, in my lifetime, there are 3 incidents that stand out that I've been concerned about our country. Number one, I was 11 years old. I wouldn't know any different. I shook hands with John Kennedy on the morning of November 22nd, 1963 in the parking lot across the street from Hotel Texas in downtown Fort Worth. 6 hours later, I heard that he had been assassinated. I was in the 6th grade. The next piece, I saw the Vietnam protest. I don't want to comment on, what kind of protests I was in during the early 1970s. That was a lifetime ago, but my moral credentials are solidly held. I feel sorry for those who lost loved ones. I'll be clear about that. But on the next one was really 2001, September 11th. And that was because we had a daughter living in D.C., and we were worried about her, and we couldn't get a hold of her for 6 or 7 hours. We knew she was not in the Pentagon. We knew where she was working, but everything was shut down. We finally got her. That's really, but you know what? There are 2 incidents that happened. Those 2 incidents, I realized we have adults in charge. We have people who are highly skilled to be leaders in this country. But the other day, I do think we have some people highly skilled to be leaders. But I'm trying to think, if I had been one of those senators and I know that some of them withdrew them, had some exceptions related to the counted electoral vote, I would have said, I think we've all had enough today, and just withdraw it. And what is said to me when people did not do that, it's like the lack of emotional maturity. So focused on one's own desire or goal in his or her life that they couldn't think beyond themselves.
Yeah, let alone spiritual maturity, right? Let alone the spiritual maturity that is like... I
wouldn't even describe
it. There's a possibility there's any spiritual maturity.
Right. And here's the shining light, though, I think, because we talked a little, because Phil, you brought up how, Mitchell, you brought up the fact that the Confederate flag found its way into the Capitol, right? But I think significant, sort of a juxtaposition is the fact that, the first Black senator from Georgia is also is the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, right? And so the dream that Dr. King lived, fought, and died for is equally just as alive, right? Albeit a couple hundred miles away for now. Right. And so I think that is the good news. The good news is there's this juxtaposition. While one thing's going on at the Capitol, right, there is a sort of inverting of the power structure happening. And so I think that's the other part. We're seeing that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was watching Morning Joe on Wednesday morning, and Senator Warnoff was on, Senator-elect Warnoff, and he was having some banter with Reverend Al Sharpton, and he in his acceptance speech, if you watched it late on Tuesday night, he talked about dawn is coming, and he has a story about his father waking him up before the sun every morning, and it's this idea that it really is the darkest before the dawn, right? And so this idea that Georgia is sending a Jewish senator and a Black senator to D.C., regardless of political affiliation, I think we can all say something extraordinary still can be done in our country, and change and hard work. Stacey Abrams and all the organizers on the ground, hard work can actually pay and move things forward. It's just, it feels like, you take those steps and then something like that happens on Wednesday and you take, a gigantic move backwards. But I think it's a good reminder, Joshua, that we are being propelled or pulled forward, regardless of what we see often.
See, I think that's the value of waiting to speak in a way.
Yeah.
So you start threading, weaving that witness together in a unique way. And I learn something new every day about this. I think that's interesting. The other thing in terms of Ossoff, don't ask me, I can't remember, I read this book about 20 years ago about a Jewish man who was lynched by the Ku Klux Klan in Georgia. He was a jeweler, I think. And so what I'm saying, I do think, I think those are both interesting elections. When you called attention to that, and all of a sudden I remember this book I read several years ago, and I can't recite it, but I'm thinking Georgia did something very different, and we don't realize how different it was.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the talking about good trouble, right? It's both of their relationship to Representative John Lewis, right? The late John Lewis. He, one was his pastor, one was his intern. Yep. Right. So he was like sort of like this sort of connecting force between them. He never made it to the Senate, right? He was in Congress, but he never made it to the Senate in particular. And so here he is represented indirectly in the wake of his death. So it's significant.
Totally.
I think, what I think is the most troubling thing about all this is that somehow politics or some political figures have co-opted the church for their own use. And so I think we need to turn the tables. And that's what I was speaking about earlier, that the church has got to speak into the culture about that which is just and merciful and righteous. And frankly, those are biblical pieces. And I listen sometimes for biblical narratives and some of that other stuff, and you can't find it. And it's not it. But I mean, if you look at the prophets and even the life of Jesus, I mean, it's really clear about what it is. When somebody says, it's not about politics, well, I think it was a political ploy to get Jesus crucified.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not necessarily, let's don't blame the Sanhedrin and the Jewish people. I mean, the Romans didn't like any trouble either.
Yeah.
Right. It was a state-sponsored execution, right?
Yeah. Well, here are the layers, though. The layers are the state convincing religious leaders that they will help them hold on to some level of power, right? But they're subjugated too, right? So that's how that works.
Yeah.
Right? We don't need to get into the intricacies of that, but it's definitely significant.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's stick with this though, because we only have a couple minutes left, and I want to the question then becomes, what do we do, right? Where are we going from here? What do we do now? And I was just on a call with the General Board of Church and Society, and one of them was talking about how they're almost nervous now because there's this sense of, well, now there's Democrats in power, and so they don't have to work as hard, basically, right? Like it's gonna take care of itself. But the work that we do from the church side and from the ethical standpoint is not tied to any specific political party, right? Like our job is to continue to push for justice, no matter who holds office, and to hold them accountable. And so, I know one thing that I'm really focused on, and one thing we're going to work with for our church and society group at White Rock is to continue to focus on immigration and what can we do then as a church, as a denomination. We do a lot with General Board of Church and Society. The Texas legislation session is about to begin. UMW are about to hold their, I don't remember what it's called. The theme is breathe. I remember that, but
it's their legislative session.
Their legislative session for it.
Yeah, it's a week from Sunday, and I'm speaking at it. So thanks for reminding me. I got to get something together here.
There you go. But I mean, there's things we can do that have nothing to do with partisan politics, but have everything to do with our call to be faithful Christians, right? And to represent the symbols that we hold true and dear well, and to give them a better narrative and give them better action in this world. And so, those are the things that I think of that are coming up. What else do you guys know of that's happening for people who are amped up about this and want to respond some way?
I would say the immigration thing, and I would start with the dreamers. That's the big thing. I mean, good night. You're going to send somebody back who doesn't even remember what back was.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. The other thing is, I get tired of, Obama built the cages. Well, they were basically for families, and they just happened pretty quickly, and they moved on through the process. So somebody stay. But, this excuse all the time from either political party, I might admit, both of them are really good about that, is the place where the church ought to call that out. And I think we ought to sort of do that. So the other thing, I do think, I know this is not popular, but at some point we're going to have to deal with climate change. I think it's a poverty issue for a lot of people. I think it's a health issue for a lot of people. The third thing we're going to have to do is advocate about health care. If the pandemic has taught us anything, there are too many Americans and too many people in Dallas County, let's say, who do not have access nor adequate health care.
Absolutely.
And that's a problem. And so, and to be honest, if we want Jesus is really clear in John 10:10, come so that you may have abundant life. So the challenge is we have brothers and sisters who don't have access to an abundant life. And Jesus came so that they would. So that means that we're left holding that gift from Jesus, called Lord, about, okay, how do we make sure that everybody has an abundant life? If everybody has an abundant life, and people have it differently, and people are worried, well, this is a socialist thing. It's not a socialist thing. It's the thing, okay, I think that my well-being finally is dependent on the community's well-being. For all of us, if we spend too much money treating people in emergency rooms, that affects the health care of everybody in this community, even people with feeds.
Absolutely.
So it's like, okay, how do we talk about the common good, the common welfare, which, by the way, are things that are talked about in terms of our own founding documents? But it's easily, they didn't pull that stuff out of the air. These people are a lot smarter than we think. They're very smart. Yeah. Instead of arguing about, well, I don't think they meant that, it's pretty clear in many places what they did mean when they wrote it.
Yeah. And to your point, Bishop, if I can kind of just like take us there, I think one of the things I'm reminded of, and I'm not going to talk about racism in particular, or even because I think, like as a Black guy, I always end up talking about that. I want to, like, if you're talking about community, Bishop, which is what you're talking about, common good, when Phil, you asked a very important question, where do we go from here? When Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Wrote his book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, he painted the vision of the world house. And right, the beloved community. We're all familiar with that terminology. And essentially, I think the greatest thing that the church can do is begin to shorten the distance between people groups, right? To help us come into closer proximity with one another.
Absolutely.
Because I think this is the biggest issue here is most times we don't see people. We either see their ideologies, we see their affiliations, we see, their identities, right? Whatever those things are, we see those things and we don't get to know the people, right? We don't know our similarities. We don't know our shared hurt and pain and anguish. So I think that's the greatest gift the church can give to the world is to bring individual people from different walks of life closer together.
Good. I mean, that's a very good point. I agree.
I do too.
Mitchell, you have a final last word?
The church will hear from me, and we'll continue to do work and push ourselves. But yeah, I appreciate Bishop McKee and Reverend Joshua Manning for joining us. It's a pleasure to spend this time with y'all and to be in ministry with you all through the work of North Texas Conference and our continued care and love for the city of Dallas and Dallas County. I know that that's not specifically your goal, Bishop, but I know that so much of what we can accomplish here in North Texas is how can we really create change here in Dallas County. So I look forward to that continued work.
Yeah, well, again, thank you all for joining us, Joshua, Bishop McKee. Friends, thanks for being a part of us this morning here for the Sunday Sit Down. We're going to do what we came to do this morning, which is to worship as well. This is part of worship, what we're doing right now. This is an important part of it, too. We're going to continue with the worship service in a few minutes. Know that the work that we have to do as a congregation continues. And so you're going to hear a lot from us, from Mitchell, from myself, about what things we can continue to do to work for justice in the city and in the state and in the country as well. So stay tuned. Go take a break for a minute. We'll be back for worship in just a couple minutes. See you soon.